I never thought I'd face a choice between two innocent lives, but there I was standing on the blood-soaked arena of Kuur under twin moons that cast an eerie blue glow across the ancient stone amphitheater, my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped animal as sweat trickled down my spine despite the cool evening air. The crowd's roar hit me like a physical force. Thousands of Bluekin Zetarians packed the seats, pounding their weapons against the ground in a thunderous rhythm that matched my racing heartbeat. Their eyes glowed with anticipation as they waited for the spectacle of my impossible decision. I'd seen bloodlust before in my years working the Outer Rim, but never so concentrated, never so institutionalized. Choose human. The command boomed across the arena, amplified by the natural acoustics of the stone bowl. Commander Zorkar stood on an elevated platform, his massive frame encased in armor made from the scaled hides of creatures I hoped never to encounter. Trophies of past kills hung from his belt, teeth, claws, and what looked disturbingly like dried humanoid ears. His face was a mask of cruel amusement as he gestured toward the center of the arena. The mighty Earth Dweller must show us his wisdom, he called to the crowd, who responded with howls of approval. The sounds scraped against my nerves like fingernails on metal. There they stood, two sisters chained to metal posts, driven deep into the ground. The younger one, maybe 15, had fiery red hair that contrasted sharply with her blue skin. Her eyes held defiance even as her body trembled. Deep bruises marked her slender arms, and dried blood crusted around a cut on her lip, but she kept her chin high, refusing to cower. Older sister, around 17, had striking purple hair and a protective stance. Despite her chains, she kept glancing at the younger one as if trying to shield her with nothing but willpower. A jagged scar ran from her temple to jawline, an old wound that had healed poorly. Liara. Zorkar pointed to the red-haired girl. And Celine, he indicated the purple-haired one. Pick one to live. Human, the other dies immediately. Hesitate and both perish. He smiled, revealing teeth filed to points. We want to understand your human values. Show us how you decide who deserves life. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as sand. 3 days ago, I was just a salvage mechanic, working the Outer Rim, stripping abandoned machinery for parts. I never asked to be part of anyone's sick game. My only goal had been to collect enough scrap to trade for fuel cells. My little salvage ship needed a boost to reach the next outpost, but a wrong turn during a scavenging run had brought me face to face with a Zetarian patrol, and now was their latest entertainment. The memories of my capture flashed through my mind, the shock of their ambush, the humiliation of being dragged through their settlement like a trophy animal, the cold cell where they'd kept me, without food or water for a day before bringing me here. Each indignity had stoked a fire in my gut, but I'd held my tongue, waiting for an opening. I was no stranger to tight spots. You don't survive long as a solo salvager in the Outer Rim without learning patience. The crowd grew impatient, their rhythmic pounding intensifying. Guards stood at each arena entrance, wielding long spears with cruel barbed tips that gleamed in the moonlight. The sister stared at me, not with hatred but with a strange acceptance that cut deeper than any blade. They'd been here before. I realized, maybe not in this exact situation, but they knew the cruelty of these people intimately. May I approach? Them, I called out, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Years of haggling with unscrupulous traders had taught me to hide my fear, but even I was impressed by how calm I sounded. Zorar considered for a moment, then nodded, his lips curling into a smirk. Closer look at your victims. Very well. But touch their chains and my guards will turn you into a pincushion. He made a gesture and 4 guards moved closer, spears leveled at my back. I walked forward slowly, my mind racing faster than it had ever had in my life. I wasn't a warrior, just a mechanic who knew how to turn scrap metal into functional parts, but I'd survived on the fringes of civilized space long enough to know that systems, even ones designed for cruelty, have weaknesses. Nothing is perfect, everything breaks. Eventually, that's the first lesson of salvage work. As I approached, I studied everything with the practiced eye of someone who takes apart complex machinery for a living. The chains looked old, much older than the polished weapons of the guards. Centuries of use had worn the links, making them thinner. In places, the posts they were attached to had been used countless times, the metal stressed and fatigued from years of struggling victims. The locks were ancient but solid, probably effective enough for most prisoners, but maybe not for someone who disassembled complex equipment daily. The arena floor itself had sections of ancient grading, probably covering drainage systems for blood and rain. Some sections looked looser than others, with gaps between the metal and stone, possible escape routes. If we could reach them, I stopped in front of the sisters. Up close I could see the patterns on their blue skin, subtle markings that seemed to shift with their breathing. Their eyes were deep violet with flecks of silver, beautiful and utterly alien, yet filled with very human emotions: fear, resignation, and a flicker of desperate hope as they looked at me. "I'm sorry," I said softly, making sure my body blocked Zorar's view of my hands. As I spoke, I worked a metal pin from my belt buckle, a small tool I'd fashioned years ago after being locked in a storage compartment during a salvage run gone wrong. I always carried it, even when stripped of obvious tools. "I won't choose." Selen's eyes widened slightly as she noticed my fingers working on her luck. She shifted her position slightly, using her body to better conceal my movements from the guards. I kept talking loud enough for the guards to hear. "This isn't right. I can't decide." Something like this. My fingers worked steadily, feeling each tumbler in the ancient mechanism. These locks were crude but effective, designed to be difficult to pick without proper tools. But difficult isn't impossible, especially with the right knowledge. "You must choose," Zorar bellowed, his patience wearing thin. The crowd echoed his demand, the sound building to a crescendo that made the very ground shake beneath my feet. I felt the lock give way under my fingers, but maintained pressure to keep it closed. Just a moment, I called back, letting irritation color my voice. "If I must condemn someone to death, at least allow me to make an informed decision." Commander laughed, a sound like stones grinding together. "Take your time, human. Examine them like cattle at market." His casual cruelty made my blood boil, but I channeled that anger into focus. I moved to Liara, pretending to study her face while my hands worked on her restraints. Her chains were even more worn, the lock mechanism simpler. My fingers worked the tumblers, finding resistance, then give resistance, then Give, what's your name? Liara whispered. Her voice barely audible. Kai murmured, not looking directly at her. Kyrain, are you really going to pick one of us? The question held no accusation, just a simple desire to know. Her fate, no, I replied softly. When I give the signal, be ready to run. Hope flared in her eyes, but she quickly masked it, dropping her gaze as a guard glanced our way. I've made my decision, I announced, turning to face Zorar. Commander leaned forward eagerly, his massive hands gripping the stone balustrade of his platform. The crowd fell silent, anticipating my choice. I raised my hand slowly as if to point. Then I spun back around and yanked both locks open simultaneously. Run, I shouted, grabbing a broken piece of metal from the ground, a former weapon or chain link, its edge jagged and sharp. My heart leaped into my throat as adrenaline flooded my system. There was no going back now. The sisters didn't hesitate. Chains fell away as they bolted toward the nearest drainage grade. The crowd silence shattered into chaos, shouts of surprise, anger, and, for some, exhilarated excitement at this unexpected turn in the entertainment. Guards shouted in confusion, their disciplined formation breaking as they rushed forward. I swung my makeshift weapon in a wide arc, catching the first guard across his unprotected face. He fell back, blue blood spraying from the gash. The sight of it, so alien and yet so familiar, momentarily froze me. I'd never deliberately hurt another being before. Survival had never demanded it. The hesitation nearly cost me as a spear thrust toward my midsection. I twisted aside, the barbed tip tearing my shirt and grazing my ribs with a line of fire. I responded instinctively, driving my elbow into the guard's throat. He dropped his spear, hands clutching his crushed windpipe as he fell to his knees. I snatched up the fallen spear and ran after the sisters, who were already pulling at the grate. Together we heaved it open, the ancient metal shrieking in protest. I thrust the spear at an approaching guard, forcing him back, then followed the sisters through the opening. We slipped below just as more spears clattered against the stone where we'd stood seconds before. The fall was short but jarring, landing us in a foul-smelling tunnel beneath the arena. This way, I hissed, pulling them into the darkness as guards shouted. Above us, the sound of heavy boots on metal told me they were following. We ran through the tunnel, guided only by dim light filtering through occasional grates overhead. The stench was overwhelming. Centuries of blood, excrement, and decay filled these forgotten spaces, forcing me to breathe through my mouth. The passages branched like arteries, forming a labyrinth beneath the arena. Each intersection required a split-second decision with no way to know if we were heading toward freedom or a dead end. I chose paths that sloped downward, hoping they would eventually lead outside the arena. Complex, how did you know these were here? Selene whispered as we paused at an intersection, our labored breathing echoing in the confined space. I didn't, I admitted, wiping sweat from my eyes. The cut on my side was beginning to throb, a steady pulse of pain with each heartbeat. But arenas need drainage. Blood and rain have to go somewhere. A distant shout echoed through the tunnels, followed by the clatter of weapons. They were organizing a systematic search. We needed to move. Do you know where these lead? I asked, hoping the sisters' knowledge of their world might give us an advantage. LRA shook her head, but Celine hesitated. In the dim light, I noticed her fingers touching something. At her throat, a small metal pendant. That caught what little light penetrated. This underworld, what is that? I demanded, suddenly suspicious. Timing was wrong, her reluctance to answer the way her eyes darted away. From mine, Celine's hand dropped. Nothing, but I'd spent years identifying valuable parts in piles of junk. I grabbed her wrist and pulled her hand away from the necklace. The pendant was no ordinary jewelry. It had a small depression that looked like a mouthpiece, and tiny apertures that might emit sound or signal. It's a tracker, isn't it? I said, my voice hardening. Or some kind of signal device. Tears welled in Celine's eyes, catching the faint light. Like liquid silver, they said if I helped them find you after the escape, they'd spare Liara. I had no choice. Her voice broke on the last word, years of fear and impossible decisions evident in that single crack. Elari gasped, stepping away from her sister, her expression crumpled, betrayal written across features still young enough that they should have known only kindness. You were going to betray us. I was trying to save you. Celine shot back, reaching for her sister, who flinched away. You know what they do to those who defy them. I watched them kill Mother for standing up to them. I couldn't let that happen to you too. I understood her desperate choice, but we couldn't afford misplaced mercy. I grabbed the pendant and smashed it against the stone wall, grinding the pieces under my heel for good measure. The small crunch it made seemed inadequate for the damage it might have caused us. Now we move, I said firmly, ending the sisterly conflict before it could escalate, and we trust each other, or we all die. The hurt in Liara's eyes didn't fade, but she nodded. Practical survival instincts overriding emotional pain. Celine wiped her tears with a grimy hand, leaving streaks of dirt across her blue cheeks. We continued through the labyrinth, choosing passages that sloped downward, hoping they'd eventually lead outside the arena complex. The sounds of pursuit grew louder, then faded as we changed direction. My salvagers instincts helped us navigate, following air currents, noting the wear patterns on the floor that indicated frequently used paths, listening for sounds that might indicate open spaces ahead. My side burned with each step, the initial adrenaline wearing off to reveal the true extent of the injury. It wasn't deep enough to be life-threatening, but in these filthy tunnels, infection was a real concern. I pressed on, ignoring the pain. Pain was just information, and right now, that information wasn't useful. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, we reached a larger chamber where several tunnels converged. Water flowed through central channel, disappearing through a grate too small for us to follow. The distant shouts were growing closer, again echoing with unnerving clarity. They're hurting us, I realized aloud. The pattern suddenly clear, blocking some passages to force us in a specific direction. Celine looked around frantically, her earlier composure cracking. What do we do? I scanned the chamber, noting every feature with desperate intensity. Nothing was ever truly a dead end if you looked hard enough. My eyes caught a narrow ledge that ran along the wall above the water line, partially hidden by centuries of mineral deposits. There, if we follow that, we might be able to double back past them. We edged along the slippery stone, pressing our backs against the damp wall. The ledge narrowed to barely the width of a foot in places, forcing us to shuffle sideways with agonizing slowness. Below us the water ran black. In the darkness, hiding whatever depth it might contain, the smell suggested it was deep enough to hide bodies, perhaps the final resting place of previous victims who had tried to escape. Lyra whimpered once as her foot slipped, but Selene caught her arm. Their earlier conflict momentarily forgotten in the instinctive act of protection, I led the way, testing each step before committing my weight, hyper-aware that a single misstep could doom us all. We had nearly reached the opposite tunnel when a harsh voice called out, "Stop right there." 2 guards had entered the chamber, spears leveled at us. In the confined space we had nowhere to hide. Their faces reflected the same cruel anticipation I'd seen in the arena. They were enjoying this hunt. "Keep going," I whispered to the sisters. "I'll handle this." Before they could protest, I slid from the ledge, landing in a crouch on the chamber floor. Water soaked through my boots as I faced the guards. They approached cautiously, spreading out to prevent escape. One was older, his blue skin weathered and marked with the scars of many battles. The other was younger, perhaps not much older than Selene, but his eyes held the same hardened cruelty. "The commander wants you alive," the older one said, but he didn't specify in what condition. His mouth twisted into a grin that promised pain. I backed up slowly, drawing them away from the sisters. Escape route. My hand found a loose stone in the wall behind me, and I pried it free, hiding it in my palm. Weight of it was reassuring, a solid connection to reality in this nightmare. "You're the first human I've seen try to escape," the younger guard comment, circling to my right. "Most just accept their fate in the arena. It makes for a cleaner death." "I'm not most humans," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the hammering of my heart. I needed to time this perfectly. The first guard lunged, his spear aimed at my leg, a disabling wound rather than a killing blow. I twisted aside and threw the stone, striking him in the throat. He staggered back, choking, his spear clattering to the ground as his hands flew to his crushed windpipe. The second guard charged while I was off balance. The spear grazed my side, reopening the earlier wound and tearing through my shirt. Pain exploded along my ribs, but I grabbed the shaft of the spear before he could pull it back, yanking him forward and driving my knee into his stomach. As he doubled over, I brought my elbow down on the back of his neck. He collapsed to the ground, unconscious or dead. I didn't stay to find out which. The first guard had recovered enough to draw a knife from his belt. He slashed wildly, his eyes wide with pain and rage. I dodged backward, feeling the air shift as the blade passed inches from my face. My back hit the wall and I ducked just as the knife embedded itself in the stone where my head had been. I surged upward, driving my shoulder into his midsection and lifting him off his feet. His momentum carried us both into the water channel. The cold shocked my system as we plunged beneath the surface. The guard's weight pressed me down, his hands wrapping around my throat. I fought against the burning in my lungs, twisting beneath him until my fingers found his knife still in its sheath. I pulled it free and drove it upward, feeling it sink into flesh with sickening ease. The pressure on my throat released immediately. I pushed the limp body aside and clawed my way back to the surface, gasping for air. Blood, his and mine, swirled in the dark water around me, turning it a strange purple in the dim light. Kai, Liara's voice echoed from above. She and Celine were still on the ledge. Horror etched on their faces. I wiped water from my eyes, fighting the wave of nausea that threatened to overwhelm me. I'd killed a sentient being. Deliberately, not in some accident or mechanical failure. The knowledge sat heavy in my stomach, but I pushed it aside. Regret was a luxury for safer times. Go, I coughed, pulling myself out of the channel. Keep moving. I recovered the fallen spear and followed them along the ledge, ignoring the throbbing pain in my side and the new bruises forming on my throat. We reached the tunnel on the far side just as shouts erupted from the chamber behind us. They'd found their comrades. This new tunnel sloped upward, which gave me hope. We climbed as quickly as our exhausted bodies would allow, the sounds of pursuit growing distant again. After several more turns, we felt a fresh breeze against our faces, not the stale, fetid air of the tunnels, but something carrying hints of vegetation and space. There's an exit ahead, I whispered, hope surging through me for the first time since our escape began. The tunnel ended at a rusted grate, covered with vines and debris, clearly unused for years. Together we pushed against it. The ancient hinges groaned, but gave way, opening to reveal the night sky, vast and star-filled above an alien landscape. We emerged on a hillside beyond the arena walls. The twin moons illuminated a landscape of jagged rock formations and twisted vegetation unlike anything I'd seen on Earth or the human colonies. In the distance, the lights of a settlement glowed, likely where the Zarians lived. When not entertaining themselves with blood sport, we need to get as far away as possible before dawn, I said, helping Liara through the opening. Her slender body was trembling with exhaustion, and I noticed bruises on her ankles where the chains had cut into her skin. They'll organize a proper hunt once they realize we've escaped the tunnels. Where will we go? Selene asked, her voice small against the vastness of the night. For all her earlier attempts at betrayal, she now seemed as lost as her sister. I scanned the horizon, noting the placement of the moons in the distant mountains that loomed like sleeping giants away from the settlement into the wilderness. It's our best chance until we can find a way off this planet. We moved quickly through the alien terrain, keeping low and using the rock formations for cover. The wind carried strange scents, metallic and organic at once, unlike anything on Earth or the human colonies I'd visited. Every shadow seemed to hide potential threats, but we pushed onward, driven by the fear of what lay behind us. The landscape was treacherous, sharp stones that cut through the thin soles of my boots, patches of ground that looked solid but gave way to sinkholes, plants whose leaves secreted a burning sap when brushed against. More than once I had to pull Liara from danger, her exhausted mind failing to register threats until too late. After an hour of hard travel, Lara stumbled, her strength finally giving out. I caught her before she fell, feeling her body go limp in my arms. I can't, she whispered, her voice breaking. I haven't eaten in days. I looked at Celine, who seemed barely stronger than her sister. They'd clearly been prisoners for some time before I arrived. We need shelter, I decided, scanning the horizon. About a 4-mile ahead, a cluster of large boulders formed a natural alcove. There we can rest for a short while. I carried Liara the remaining distance, her slight form weighing almost nothing in my arms. The Alcove provided good cover from 3 sides with a clear view of the approach. I settled the sisters in the deepest part of the shelter and checked my injuries. The cut on my side was deeper than I'd thought, the edges already showing signs of infection. I tore a strip from the bottom of my shirt and bound my ribs tightly, wincing at the pressure. "Why did you save us both?" Selene asked suddenly, her voice cutting through the silence. "You could have chosen one and been rewarded. Instead, you're wounded and hunted. Why risk everything for strangers?" I tore a strip from the bottom of my shirt and bound my ribs tightly. "I'm not in the habit of choosing who lives and who dies, especially not for someone else's entertainment, Car, but you killed those guards," Lara pointed out, her voice small and troubled. Her innocence hadn't been completely stripped away despite whatever horror she'd witnessed. "That was different. They chose their path," I finished, securing the makeshift bandage. "Besides, I'm stubborn, always have been. Tell me I have to do something, and I'll immediately start figuring out how not to do it." A weak smile touched Liara's lips. "You sound like my father. He always questioned everything too." "What happened to him?" I asked, then immediately regretted it as her face fell. The momentary lightness extinguished. "The same thing that happens to anyone who questions Zorar's authority," Selene answered darkly. "Public execution. Your family opposed him." Selene nodded, her eyes taking on faraway look. "Our father was a council member, one of the most respected voices in our community. He spoke out against the arena games, said they were making us more brutal, less civilized, that we were losing what made us different from the predators of our world. He believed we could be better," Lara added softly. "That strength didn't have to mean cruelty. Zorkar had him arrested for treason," Selene continued, bitterness edging her voice. "Our mother tried to defend him during the public trial and was killed on the spot, just cut down in front of everyone. A lesson, so you became examples." I guessed, the pieces falling into place to show what happens to families of traitors. "We became entertainment," Liara corrected bitterly. "Zorkar loves nothing more than forcing impossible choices on people. He calls it revealing true character under pressure. He's had us in the arena 3 times before today," Selene added, her voice hollow, "each time with a different prisoner forced to choose between us. Each time they chose one, and each time Zorar spared both of us at the last moment, his mercy making the crowd adore him even more." "A sick game," I muttered, disgust rising in my throat. "But this time was different," Liara said. "This time he meant to kill one of us. We could tell from the way he spoke, the way the guards prepared." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I think he was tired of us. We were no longer novel enough for his entertainment." The realization of how close they had come to death, how close they still were, hung in the air between us. I peered out at the alien landscape, considering our options. "We need to find water and food, then figure out how to get off this planet. There's a spaceport in the capital city," Selene offered, shifting to a more practical topic. "About 3 days journey on foot, but it's heavily guarded. Then we'll avoid the main entrances," I said, my mind already working through possibilities. "Every port has maintenance access points, service tunnels, places where mechanics like me can get to the guts of the ships. We just need to reach those." Distant howl cut through the night, followed by several more in response. The sisters tensed, fear flashing across their faces. Trackers, Selene whispered, reaching instinctively for her sisters. Hand-hunting beasts they can follow. Scent trails for days, Zorkars. Favorites, Liara added, her voice trembling. They're bred for the hunt. They never give up once they have a scent. I gripped the stolen knife tightly, its weight suddenly inadequate against this new threat. How good are they at swimming? What? Selene looked confused. The tunnel where I fought the guards, the water channel must lead somewhere. If we can find a stream or river, we might be able to mask our scent. There's a river that runs through the valley below us, Lara said, her eyes lighting with hope. It's where the arena drainage eventually empties. Then that's where we head next, but first rest. I settled against the rock wall, positioned to see any approach. I'll keep watch, sleep if you can. The sisters huddled together, their earlier conflict temporarily set aside in the face of greater threats. Despite their exhaustion, they slept fitfully, starting at every sound that echoed through the alien night. I kept vigil, fighting my own fatigue, my mind cycling through plans and contingencies. The distant howls grew closer throughout the night, an audible countdown to confrontation. By the time the first hints of dawn touched the horizon, a strange purplish light unlike Earth's sunrise, I knew we couldn't wait any longer. We need to move, I said gently, shaking the sisters awake. The trackers are getting closer. We set out in the purple half-light, moving as quickly as the treacherous terrain allowed. The rocky landscape gradually gave way to sparse vegetation, twisted trees with bark like polished metal and broadleaf plants that shifted color as we passed, reacting to our body heat or movement in some alien biological process. By full dawn, the twin suns creating an eerie double shadow behind every object, we reached a narrow valley where a stream cut through the rock. The water was clear but had a faint purple tinge that made me hesitate. It's safe, Liara assured me, noting my concern. Just mineral deposits from the mountains. All water on Karnar has that color. We waded into the stream, following its course downstream. The cold water numbed my feet and aggravated my wound, but it would cover our tracks and send each step sent spikes of pain through my side. But I kept my face neutral, not wanting to worry the sisters more than necessary. We traveled this way for hours, stopping occasionally to rest on the banks when the current grew too strong. During one such rest, Liara spotted movement on a nearby ridge. We froze, pressing ourselves against the rocky bank, barely breathing. A patrol of 4 Zetarian guards passed overhead, leading creatures that resembled wolves, but with elongated limbs and rich blue fur along their spines. Their eyes glowed an unnatural yellow, and their jaws looked capable of crushing bone. With ease, one beast paused, lifting its snout to the air, and for a hard, stopping moment I thought it had detected us. Then a guard yanked its chain and they moved on. There, expanding the search perimeter, I observed once they were gone. We need to move faster. The main river is just ahead, Selene said, pointing downstream. It's much larger than this tributary. If we follow it, we'll eventually reach the forest. We continued downstream until the valley widened and our small stream joined a much larger river that curved through the landscape like a blue-purple snake. The current here was stronger, forcing us to stay near the edges where we could keep our footing. Eventually the Terrain began to change again. The rocky shores gave way to soil that supported more vegetation. Trees appeared first, scattered, then in denser groupings, until we found ourselves at the edge of a forest unlike any I'd seen before. The trees here were massive, with interlocking canopies that blocked much of the sunlight. Their trunks weren't brown, but a deep indigo that almost appeared black in shadow, and they exuded a sweet musky scent that reminded me oddly of burnt sugar. It would provide better cover, but also hide potential dangers. We should find higher ground before nightfall, I suggested, eyeing the darkening forest wearily. Get a better view of what's ahead. We left the river reluctantly, knowing we were leaving an easy trail to follow once more. The forest floor was surprisingly soft, covered in a moss-like growth that muffled our footsteps. Strange sounds echoed through the trees, clicks and whistles that reminded me of whale songs I'd heard in Earth's oceans. What makes those noises? I asked, scanning the canopy nervously. Years of salvage work had taught me that the unknown was usually dangerous until proven otherwise. Tree singers, Selene replied, seeming to relax slightly at the familiar sounds. They're harmless and less disturbed. They nest in the highest branches, as if responding to her words. A creature glided between the trees overhead. It had a sleek, aerodynamic body with muse wings stretched between elongated digits like a bat, but with iridescent blue scales. Instead of fur, it trilled a complex series of notes that were answered from deeper in the forest. They're beautiful, I murmured, watching the creature soar effortlessly through the canopy. They're sacred to some of our people, Liara said. The old traditions say they carry the souls of the departed to the moons before Zora outlawed the old ways. Selene added bitterly. We climbed a rocky outcropping that rose above the tree, and giving us a vantage point to survey the terrain. The climb was arduous, especially for the weakened sisters, but the strategic advantage was worth the effort. From the top, the landscape spread out before us in all its alien beauty and danger. In the far distance, I could make out geometric shapes breaking the natural landscape. Buildings of the capital city Selene had mentioned. Between us and the city lay more forest than what appeared to be vast open plains covered in golden vegetation that rippled like water in the breeze. Will be exposed crossing that, I noted, pointing to the grasslands. My tactical mind was already calculating risks. No cover, easy visibility for pursuers, unknown fauna that might consider us prey. There's no other way, Selene said, her voice resigned. The mountains to the north are impassable, and the southern route would take us weeks. As we discussed our options, a low rumble shook the ground beneath us. At first I thought it was an earthquake, but then the rumble organized itself into rhythmic impacts. Something massive was moving through the forest below, heading in our direction. What is that? I whispered, dropping to a crouch. Fear flashed across Selene's face. Thunderfoot, a predator. We need to hide now. We scrambled down the opposite side of the outcropping, seeking cover among the rocks. Through gaps in the vegetation, I caught glimpses of movement. An enormous creature pushing through the trees with casual strength. It stood at least 15 ft tall on powerful hind legs, its fore legs relatively small, but ending curved talons. Its hide was a mottled blue-gray that blended with the shadows, and its elongated head housed rows of serrated teeth visible even at this Distance, does it hunt by scent? I whispered, sight and sound primarily. Lara replied, her voice barely audible. But its sense of smell is still better. Then ours, the Thunderfoot paused near the base of our outcropping, its nostrils flaring as it sampled the air. It knew we were close. I held my breath, pressing deeper into our hiding place. Lara trembled beside me, and I placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, feeling the rapid flutter of her pulse beneath my fingers. The predator circled the rocks, searching. It was more intelligent than I'd expected, its movements deliberate and patient, a hunter that knew its territory and its advantages. Just when I thought it might move on, it turned directly toward our hiding spot and roared, a sound so powerful I felt it in my chest cavity. "Run!" I shouted, pushing the sisters toward a gap in the rocks behind us. We burst from cover as the Thunderfoot charged, its massive head lowering to strike. I pushed Lyra and Selen ahead of me, then dove sideways as talons raw the space where I'd stood. Rolling to my feet, I faced the creature, spear gripped in both hands. My ribs screamed in protest, but fear and adrenaline dulled the pain. "Kai no, Selene!" screamed. "You can't fight it." Thunderfoot regarded me with cold, calculating eyes. I knew she was right. The spear was a toothpick compared to this monster, but I only needed to buy them time to escape, get to the trees. I called, never taking my eyes off the predator. "It's too big to follow." Quickly, the creature charged again. I waited until the last possible moment, then threw myself aside, driving the spear into its flank as it passed. The weapon snapped on impact, barely penetrating the thick hide. Thunderfoot bellowed in rage rather than pain, wheeling around with surprising agility for something so large. I scrambled backward, now weaponless. My hand found a rock, and I hurled it at the creature's face. It bounced off harmlessly, only serving to further enrage the predator. My back hit a tree, and I realized I'd run out of room to maneuver. The predator approached more cautiously this time, wary after being struck. It lowered its head, preparing for a killing blow. In that moment, facing death, strange clarity washed over me. I saw my life with crystal precision, the lonely years scavenging on the rim, the connections I'd never made, the roots I'd never put down, all of it leading to this moment, this impossible stand against a creature from a nightmare. And yet I felt no regret. For once in my life, I was fighting for something more than mere survival. A high-pitched whistle pierced the air, followed by another from a different direction. The Thunderfoot's head snapped up, suddenly alert. More whistles answered, forming a chorus that seemed to come from all around us. Tree singers were responding to our distress. The predator hesitated, caught between the easy prey before it and the growing threat from above. Then movement in the canopy drew its attention, dozens of tree singers launching themselves from branch to branch, their wings catching the dappled sunlight. One swooped low, then another, their sharp wing edges slicing across the Thunderfoot's exposed back. The predator roared and swatted at them, but they were too quick, darting in to deliver cuts before retreating to safety. Blood welled from a dozen minor wounds as the assault continued. I didn't wait to see more. I sprinted toward where the sisters had disappeared into the forest, the sounds of battle fading behind me. I found them hiding among dense underbrush, about 100 yards away, their faces pale with fear and exhaustion. What happened?" Liara asked as I dropped beside them, gasping for breath. "Tree singers," I panted, my lungs burning with exertion. "They attacked." Seleni's eyes widened. "That's impossible. They never interfere with ground predators." "Well, someone forgot to tell them that," I said, peering back. Through the trees, the Thunderfoot was retreating, still swatting futilely at the agile flyers. Whatever the reason, it saved my life. Maybe they recognized we were fleeing from something worse than a Thunderfoot, Liara suggested quietly. "Even animals can sense true evil." We continued through the forest, maintaining a brisk pace despite our exhaustion. The tree singers followed overhead, their calls creating a canopy of sound that seemed to track our movement. Were they protecting us, warning others of our presence? I couldn't tell, but their presence was strangely comforting. As we walked, Selene explained more about their world. "Karnar wasn't always like this," she said, her voice taking on the cadence of someone reciting history. "The oldest stories say our people once lived in harmony with the land, that we communed with creatures like the tree singers." "What changed?" I asked, curious. "Despite our dire circumstances, resource scarcity initially," she replied. "Then the rise of warlords who controlled what remained. Zorar's grandfather was the most ruthless, uniting the others under his rule through fear and spectacle." "Arena, I guess." She nodded. "A way to channel aggression, they said, to maintain order through controlled violence. But it changed us generation by generation. What began as necessity became entertainment, then religion. By late afternoon, the forest began to thin, revealing the open plains we'd seen from above. Golden grass stretched to the horizon, moving in waves with the wind. It would be dangerous crossing. Nowhere to hide, completely exposed to both the elements and pursuers. But the city beckoned on the far side, our only hope of finding a way off this planet. "We should rest and wait for dark," I suggested, eyeing the remaining hours of daylight wearily. We found a hollow beneath the twisted roots of an ancient tree and settled in to wait. The sisters fell asleep almost immediately, exhaustion finally overcoming fear. I kept watch, nursing the knife-eyed recovered and listening to the unfamiliar sounds of this alien world. My thoughts drifted to how quickly life could change. 3 days ago I was just a salvage mechanic with a small ship and smaller ambitions. I'd spent years drifting from outpost to outpost, taking odd jobs, avoiding entanglements. The solitary life had suited me, or so told myself. Now I was responsible for 2 lives besides my own, hunted by an entire civilization of blue-skinned aliens who considered humans little more than exotic entertainment. The weight of that responsibility should have terrified me. Instead, I found it strangely anchoring. For the first time in years, my actions mattered beyond my own survival. These sisters, with their courage and their complicated bond, had given me something I hadn't realized I was missing: purpose. A soft sound drew my attention. LRA was weeping in her sleep, her face contorted with fear or sorrow. I gently touched her shoulder, and her eyes flew open, wild with panic, until recognition dawned. "It's okay," I whispered. "Just a dream." She nodded, wiping her face. "I keep seeing the arena, hearing the crowd. We're far from there now, but not far enough." She drew her knees to her chest. "They won't stop hunting us, you know, especially Zorar. You've humiliated him, and he never Forgets, then we'll just have to disappear somewhere he can't follow, I said with more confidence than I felt. The odds were stacked against us, but giving in to despair would only ensure our capture or death. Lara studied me curiously. Why do you keep fighting? You could have left us behind, found a way to escape on your own. I considered her question seriously. Because some lines you don't cross, leaving people behind, is one of them. Choosing who lives and who dies is another, even when it puts your life at risk, especially then. That's when it matters most. I gestured to the alien landscape around us. Out here on the rim, rules get flexible. Law is whatever the strongest person says it is. If we don't hold on to some principles, we're no better than predators like your Thunderfoot back there. Is that why you became salvager, to live by your own principles? The question caught me off guard. I never articulated my reason to anyone, not even myself. Partly, I also like giving old things new purpose, finding value where others see only junk. I smiled slightly. And I'm not great with authority. Liara seemed to accept this, falling silent for a long moment. Then thank you for saving us both. We're not saved yet, I reminded her, though I appreciated the sentiment. Get some more rest. We've got a long night ahead. As darkness fell, we prepared to cross the plains. The twin moons provided enough light to see by, but would also make us visible to any watchers. Our only advantage was the vastness of the terrain. Even with patrols, they couldn't cover everything. Stay low in the grass when possible, I instructed. If you hear anything, freeze. Movement catches the eye faster than stillness. We set out across the open ground. The city lights a distant beacon guiding our way. The grass reached nearly to our waist in places, providing some concealment as long as we crouched. Every sound made me tense. The rustle of wind through the stalks, the chirp of insects, the occasional distant call of some nocturnal creature. We'd covered perhaps a mile when Selene suddenly grabbed my arm, pulling me down into a crouch. She pointed skyward without word. A dark shape passed overhead. Aircraft of some kind. It's running. Lights dimmed. A searchlight swept the plains below, creating a circle of harsh white illumination that passed within 50 yards of our position. Petrol skiff, Selene whispered once it had passed. They're using everything they have to find us. That was both good and bad news. Good because it meant they hadn't located us yet. Bad because they were committing significant resources to the hunt. Zor must be furious to authorize such a wide-scale search. He's never been defied like this before. Liara murmured, echoing my thoughts. A human outsmarting him, helping prisoners escape. It's unprecedented. We continued our journey through the night, freezing whenever patrols passed overhead. The city grew slowly larger, details becoming clearer with each passing hour. It was an impressive sight. Spires of some crystalline material rising hundreds of feet into the air, connected by arching bridges that glowed with soft blue light. By dawn, we'd reached the outskirts. Agricultural fields tended by what appeared to be automated machinery. We hid among storage containers at the edge of a harvested field, watching workers arrive as the twin suns crested the horizon. The spaceport is in the central district, Selene said, pointing toward the tallest spires, but there are checkpoints at every sector boundary. We'll need identification or a way to bypass security. I studied the workers entering the field. They wore simple coveralls with colored patches that must denote their roles or clearance levels. If we could get some of those uniforms, we might be able to move more freely. Agricultural workers have limited access. Cellini warned they can't enter the central districts without special permission. I continued observing, noting patterns and routines. What about those? I pointed to workers with blue shoulder patches who seemed to have more freedom of movement, consulting with supervisors and entering different areas. Maintenance technicians, Lear identified they service the automated equipment. They have broader access because systems break down everywhere. That was exactly what we needed. We watched until we identified a pattern. Small storage shed where workers would occasionally enter alone to retrieve equipment when the field was at its busiest, with supervisors distracted by the day's operations. We made our move. I approached the shed first, timing my movement to coincide with a loader vehicle passing between me and the main group of workers. Once inside, I waited. Within minutes, the door opened and a Zetarian worker entered. Before he could react, I struck him from behind with a tool I'd grabbed from a shelf. He collapsed without a sound. I'm sorry, I muttered, dragging him behind some crates. The violence left a bitter taste in my mouth, but hesitation now would doom us all. I took his coveralls and identification badge, then signaled for the sisters to join me. We found additional uniforms in a locker and quickly changed. The fit wasn't perfect. The Zetarians were generally taller and more slender than humans, but it was close enough to avoid casual detection. I used some grease from a nearby container to darken my skin slightly, hoping it would pass a cursory inspection. Keep your heads down and follow my lead, I instructed, adjusting the cap to shadow my face. Act like you belong. That's half the battle. We left the shed and walked purposefully toward the city proper. Workers glanced at us, but returned to their task without comment. Our stolen badges got us through the first checkpoint with nothing more than a cursory scan. The guard barely looked at us, just another group of maintenance workers heading into the city for their shift. Inside the city, we faced a new challenge, navigating the unfamiliar layout without appearing lost. Streets branched in seemingly random patterns connected by elevated walkways and underground passages. The population density increased as we moved inward, making it easier to blend with the crowd, but harder to move quickly. There's a public transport terminal ahead, Cellini whispered, indicating a platform where Zetarians were boarding a sleek hovering vehicle. It connects to all districts, including the spaceport. We joined the queue, keeping our faces averted from the security cameras positioned overhead. When our turn came to board, I swiped the stolen badge over the scanner. For a heart-stopping moment, the light remained red, then it flashed green and we hurried aboard. The transport moved swiftly through the city, offering glimpses of Zetarian life through large windows. Despite their violent arena culture, much of their society seemed orderly and advanced. Markets bustled with activity. Public spaces featured intricate water sculptures, and children played in designated areas under watchful eyes. It's not all like the arena, Liara said quietly, following my gaze. Most people just live their lives. It's the military caste that controls the blood sports. Does everyone agree with that system? I asked. Cellini shook her head. Many oppose it privately, but Zorkar and His supporters eliminate public dissent. Quickly, like our father, a sudden commotion at the front of the transport drew our attention. 2 armed guards had boarded and were checking identification more thoroughly than at the station. They were moving systematically through the passengers, comparing faces to some kind of handheld device. They're looking for us. Lara breathed, shrinking back in her seat. Stay calm, I murmured. We're just maintenance workers heading to a job. The guards were getting closer, checking each passenger in turn. I noticed an emergency exit handle near our seats and subtly shifted my position to be ready to grab it. If they identified us, we'd have seconds to react. Just as the guards reached the row in front of us, the transport slowed for a station. In the momentary distraction of arrival, I nudged the sisters. Next stop, we get off. Casual but quick. The transport doors opened, and we exited with a group of other passengers. I could feel the guards' eyes on our backs, but resisted the urge to look back or rush. We maintained a steady pace until we rounded a corner, then immediately ducked into a side street. That was close, Selene whispered, her voice shaking. Too close, I agreed. They must have distributed our descriptions throughout the city. We can't risk public transport. Again, the transport arrived at the Central District Station, where security was noticeably tighter. Guards checked identification more thoroughly, and scanner arches monitored everyone passing through. We hung back, observing. We'll never get through that, Liara whispered. I watched the pattern of the guards, noting when their attention wavered. We don't need to look. I pointed to a maintenance door, partially hidden behind a decorative column. Service access. Every station has them. We waited for a large group to create a distraction, then slip behind the column. The door required a key card, but the electronic lock was an older model. I pried open the control panel with my knife and crossed 2 wires. The lock disengaged with a soft click. Beyond the door lay a network of maintenance tunnels that smelled of oil and ozone. Pipes and conduits ran along the ceilings, labeled in the Zetarian script I couldn't read. Which way to the spaceport, I asked. Selene studied the markings. This one, she said, pointing to a large conduit with blue stripes. It's marked for central power distribution. The spaceport would need significant power. We followed the conduit through a maze of intersecting passages, encountering no one except an occasional maintenance drone that ignored our presence. After nearly an hour of navigation, we reached a larger junction chamber where the noise level increased dramatically. The rumble of engines vibrated through the walls. We must be underneath the landing pads, I said, feeling a surge of hope. Now we just need to find a ship we can use. Maintenance ladder led up to a hatch in the ceiling. I climbed it carefully and eased the hatch open. A fraction beyond was a vast hangar filled with spacecraft of various sizes. Workers moved between them, performing pre-flight checks and loading cargo. Guards were present but focused primarily on the main entrances. I closed the hatch and descended. There are dozens of ships up there. If we can get to one that's preparing for departure, we might be able to stow away. How do we know which ones are leaving soon? Lear asked. I grinned. By checking the fuel lines. Active fueling means imminent departure. We found another access point closer to the hangar floor and emerged behind a stack of cargo containers. From this vantage Point I could see which ships were being prepared for launch. A small freighter near the far wall had fuel hoses connected and a cargo ramp still lowered as the last crates were being loaded. That one I decided we wait until they are doing final checks, then slip aboard while the crew is distracted. We worked our way around the perimeter of the hangar, using the containers for cover. A sudden commotion at the main entrance drew everyone's attention. A squad of elite guards marching in, led by a familiar, imposing figure whose very presence seemed to suck the energy from the room. Sore car, Selene breath shrinking back against the wall. Her face had gone pale and I could see her hands trembling. The commander's voice boomed across the hangar. Lock down all departing vessels. Check every ship, every container. The fugitives will not escape. Guards fanned out methodically, working their way through the hangar. Our window of opportunity was closing. Fast change of plans, I whispered. We need a distraction. I scanned our surroundings and spotted a fuel tanker parked near a maintenance bay. An idea formed, dangerous but potentially effective. Stay here, I told the sisters. When chaos breaks out, run for that freighter, hide in the cargo hold, and wait for me. What are you going to do? Lear asked, fear evident in her eyes. Something stupid, I admitted, but necessary. If I don't make it to the ship, find somewhere to hide and wait for another chance. We won't leave without you, Selene declared firmly. Yes, you will, I countered, if it comes to that. Promise me. They hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Good, now get ready to move fast. Before they could protest further, I slipped away, circling behind the rows of containers until I reached the fuel tanker. The operator had left the controls, momentarily engaged in conversation with a dock worker. I climbed into the cab and familiarized myself with the alien controls. Different design, but the principles were similar to human equipment. I started the engine, drawing surprised shouts from nearby workers. Ignoring them, I accelerated the tank toward a stack of empty containers near the center of the hangar. Guards turned, weapons raised, but hesitated to fire at the volatile fuel vehicle. At the last moment, I locked the controls in position and jumped from the cab, rolling behind cover as the tanker crashed into the containers with a deafening impact. Fuel sprayed from ruptured tanks and electrical sparks from damaged equipment ignited it. Instantly, fire erupted in a wooing column, triggering emergency alarms. Throughout the facility, chaos erupted as workers ran for safety and emergency protocols activated. Overhead, sprinklers released fire-suppressing foam, further adding to the confusion. Through the mayhem, I caught a glimpse of blue movement as the sisters made their dash toward the freighter. I circled around the spreading fire, keeping low and using the distraction to my advantage. Guards were focused on evacuation procedures and containing the blaze, not on watching for escape prisoners. I reached the freighter just as its engines began spooling up, pilot preparing for emergency departure. To escape the fire spread, the cargo ramp was already rising. I sprinted the final distance and dove beneath it, squeezing through the narrowing gap before it sealed inside the dark cargo hold. I called softly, Liara Selene. Here came Liara's whispered response from behind a secured pallet. I joined them as the ship lurched, breaking free of its docking clamps. Through a small viewport, I watched the hangar recede, Below us, in the confusion, we'd made it. Aboard without detection, will they follow? Selene asked, her voice tight with fear. Eventually, I admitted, but they'll have to organize pursuit ships. And by then we'll have a head start. Freighter climbed rapidly through the atmosphere, engine straining against Carner's gravity. Soon the vibration changed tone as we broke into open space. I allowed myself a moment of relief. We'd escaped the planet at least. What now? Lear asked, her voice small in the cavernous cargo hold. Now we figure out where the ship is heading and plan our next move. I examined our surroundings more carefully. This looks like a standard cargo configuration. There should be maintenance access to the main deck somewhere. We searched the hold until we found a service crawlway hidden behind a panel. I squeezed through first, emerging in a narrow corridor that connected the ship's primary systems. Voices echoed from the direction of the bridge, the crew discussing the unexpected emergency departure. I motioned for the sisters to stay quiet and crept forward, listening. The ship was bound for a trading outpost in a neighboring system, 3 days' journey. At standard speed, we could remain hidden in the cargo hold until then, though food and water would be challenges. As I turned to share this information with Lara and Selene, a rough hand grabbed my shoulder and spun me around. I found myself face to face with a Zetarian crewman, his expression shifting from surprise to recognition. Intruder, he shouted, reaching for a communication device at his belt. I reacted instantly, driving my fist into his midsection. He doubled over but managed to activate his communicator before I could stop him. Alarms blared throughout the ship as I wrestled him to the ground. Run, I shouted to the sisters. Find somewhere to hide. More footsteps pounded down the corridor as additional crew responded to the alarm. I knocked the first crewman unconscious and turned to face the newcomers, 3 of them all armed with shock batons. Not good odds. I backed up, looking for any advantage. My hand found a pipe running along the wall, a pressure conduit of some kind. I wrenched it free, releasing a cloud of steam that momentarily obscured the corridor. Through the hissing vapor, I swung the metal pipe in a wide arc, catching the lead crewman across the chest. He fell back into his companions, creating a tangle of limbs. I used the moment to retreat, searching for where the sisters had gone. A hand reached out from a recessed maintenance hatch, grabbing my shirt and pulling me inside. The space was barely large enough for the 3 of us, filled with humming machinery and bundled cables. There, sealing all compartments, Selene whispered urgently. They'll search the entire ship. We need a better option than hiding. I agreed. The ship wasn't large enough to evade a thorough search for long. My mind raced through possibilities, discarding each as quickly as it formed. Then I remembered a common feature of all interstellar vessels: the escape pods. Every freighter has them. They'll be monitored, Lara pointed out. Yes, but they might not expect us to use one while in deep space. I peered through a crack in the hatch. The corridor was clear for the moment. It's our best chance. We slipped out of hiding and moved through the ship's service passages, avoiding the main corridors where search parties concentrated their efforts. Every intersection required careful reconnaissance before proceeding. Every hatch a potential trap. Twice we backtracked to avoid detection, adding precious minutes to our journey. Finally, we reached the Emergency evacuation bay where 4 escape pods were docked in their launch. Cradles, a single crewman stood guard, monitoring a control panel that would show any pod activations. I signaled for the sisters to wait, then removed a small access panel near our position. Inside was a bundle of control wires. Standard configuration for emergency systems. I selected 3 specific connections and crossed them. Warning. Lights flashed on the guard's panel. He frowned, tapping commands to diagnose the issue. When that failed to resolve it, he moved to a secondary station farther down the bay, his back now to the pods. We rushed forward silently. Reaching the nearest pod, the hatch opened with a soft hiss, and we climbed inside. I sealed it behind us and activated the launch sequence before the guard could react. The pod shuddered as explosive bolts fired, separating us from the freighter. Alarms would be sounding on the bridge now, but it was too late to stop our departure. The pod's small viewport showed the freighter receding rapidly as automated thrusters pushed us away at maximum acceleration. Will they come after us? Lara asked, strapping herself into one of the 4 seats. Her face was drawn with exhaustion, but her eyes held determination that impressed me. I checked the pod systems. Probably not. Immediately, changing course for a single escape pod would delay their delivery schedule. More likely they'll report our position and continue their journey, so we're just floating in space. Selene didn't try to hide her concern, for now I studied the navigation controls. These pods are designed for planetary descent, but they can also be programmed for specific coordinates if there's anything within range. The console displayed a star chart of the local sector. Several planetary bodies were marked along with space stations and established shipping lanes. One marker caught my attention. Small mining outpost on an asteroid in a neighboring system. It wasn't ideal, but it was within the pod's limited range. There I decided, entering the coordinates. We can reach it in about 30 hours if we burn most of our fuel reserves. The pod's engines fired again, adjusting our trajectory toward the new destination. With our course set, I finally allowed myself to relax slightly, taking inventory of our supply. Emergency rations for 3 days, water recyclers, basic medical equipment. We would make it barely. Liara touched my arm, drawing my attention. What happens when we reach this outpost? Won't they be looking for us there too? Probably, I admitted, but mining outposts are different from central worlds. People mind their own business, ask fewer questions. We might find transport willing to take passengers with no identification, or we might find bounty hunters waiting for a reward. Selene countered. Then we'll deal with that when it comes. I leaned back in my seat, suddenly aware of how exhausted I was. The adrenaline that had kept me going for days was wearing off, and the pain from my injuries returned with a vengeance. 4. Now we've escaped Karner. That's more than I thought possible 2 days ago. Sisters exchanged glances, some unspoken communication passing between them. Thank you, Lara said finally, not just for saving us, but for not choosing, for refusing to play by their rules. Most would have chosen, Selene added quietly. It would have been easier, I thought. About the arena, the crowd's bloodthirsty roar, Zorkar's cruel smile, as he forced an impossible choice upon me. Easier isn't always right. Sometimes you have to make your own options. We settled into an uneasy routine as the pod carried us through the void. Sleep came in short bursts with one of us, always keeping watch. The sisters shared stories of their life before Zorar's rise to power, memories of a father who taught them to question authority, a mother who sang ancient songs that honored the natural world. I found myself envying their sense of connection to something larger than themselves, a history and culture that gave meaning to their resistance. In return, I shared fragments of my own past, growing up in the industrial wastelands of a forgotten Earth colony, learning mechanics from an old salvager who took me in after my parents died in a refinery accident. My eventual escape to the stars where I could live by my own rules. Is there anyone waiting for you? Liar asked. During one of these exchanges, anyone who will notice you're missing. I shook my head. Not really. Other salvagers might wonder if they don't see me at the usual trading post, but they'll just assume I found a better route or I left. The alternative unspoken. That sounds lonely, she observed without judgment. It was freedom, I corrected, though her words had struck closer to the truth than I wanted to admit, or I thought it was. And now, Selene asked. I considered the question. Now I'm not so sure. Maybe freedom isn't just about avoiding attachments. Maybe it's also about choosing which ones matter. As we neared the mining outpost, our conversation turned practical again. We needed a plan for arrival, a way to blend in with the rough and tumble population of miners, traders and drifters. I can pose as a mechanic looking for work, I suggested. That's believable enough, and my skills would be valuable in a place like that. What about us? Selene asked. Two Zetarian females will draw attention anywhere outside our home world. She was right. Their blue skin and distinctive features would be immediately noticeable. In a human-dominated outpost, you'll have to be my assistants, technical specialists I picked up on a job. Will anyone believe that? Lara looked doubtful. Stranger arrangements exist in the outer systems, I assured her. Key is confidence. Act like you belong, and most people won't question it. The mining outpost grew visible in our viewport, a sprawling complex of modules and structures attached to the surface of a massive asteroid. Landing beacons guided approaching vessels to designated areas, their rhythmic pulses creating patterns against the void. Brace for deceleration, I warned as I activated the landing sequence. The pod shuddered as retro thrusters fired, slowing our approach. A transmission crackled through the comm system. Unidentified pod, this is Helios Station Control. State your origin and purpose. I hesitated, then keyed the response. Helios Control, this is Salvage Mechanic Kyrane, emergency departure from cargo vessel due to life support failure in my section, requesting permission to dock. There was a long pause and I held my breath. Finally, clearance granted for emergency docking at Bay 12. Medical team will meet you on arrival. Negative. On medical, I responded quickly. No injuries, just equipment malfunction. Standard inspection will suffice. There. Another pause. Acknowledged. Proceed to Bay 12. I guided the pod toward the designated bay, which opened to receive us. As we approached, the docking clamps engaged with a metallic clunk, securing the pod to the station's exterior. Ready? I asked the sisters as the airlock cycled. They nodded, faces set with determination. Despite the fear I Knew they felt we'd come too far to falter now. The airlock door slid open to reveal a utilitarian docking bay, typical of mining operations. Functional, grimy, and bustling with activity. A lone security officer waited beside the access terminal, looking bored. Identification, he demanded as we approached. Lost in the emergency, I replied smoothly. Everything happened so fast I barely had time to get my assistants into the pod. He eyed us suspiciously, his gaze lingering on the sisters. Zarians. Don't see many of your kind out here. Those specialized technical consultants. Selene replied before I could, her voice confident. Microgravity mining systems are our specialty. I suppressed a smile at her quick thinking. The officer seemed emlified but not entirely convinced. You'll need to register with station security within 24 hours. Until then, you're restricted to public areas. He handed us temporary access cards, and there's a 50 credit docking fee for the pod. I made a show of checking empty pockets. Lost my credit chip with everything else. Can I work it off? I'm a damn good mechanic. He snorted. Talk to Jorax in maintenance. Level 3. Section D. He's always short-handed. We thanked him and moved into the main concourse. The station's interior was a maze of corridors and open spaces filled with the sounds of machinery, commerce, and 100 different languages. Miners in stained coveralls mingled with traders hawking goods from across the sector. Security personnel patrolled casually, more concerned with major disruptions than minor infractions. We need to find communications, I murmured. As we walked, contact someone who can get us proper transport out of this system before word reaches here about our escape. Who would help us? Lara asked. We have no money, no connections. It was a valid question. My usual contacts were scattered across systems, none particularly close or reliable. Then a name surfaced from memory. Someone I'd helped years ago who had promised a favor in return. Shibri. There's a trader named Maddox who owes me. Last I heard, she was operating in this sector. If we can get a message to her, she might be willing to give us passage. We found a public communications terminal in a crowded market area. The ambient noise provided cover as I accessed the system, searching for registered traders currently docked at the station. To my surprise and relief, the name Maddox Freighter Second Chance appeared on the list. She's here, I said, feeling a spark of hope. Docking Bay 28. We made our way through the station, avoiding security checkpoints where possible. The temporary passes got us through the necessary barriers, though each scan made me tense, waiting for alarms that never came. By the time we reached Bay 28, my nerves were frayed but intact. The Second Chance was a mid-size freighter with visible modifications for enhanced speed and defensive capabilities, not unusual for independent traders who navigated the more dangerous routes. Its hull bore the scars of space debris and possibly weapons fire patched over but not concealed. A woman in her 50s supervised the loading of cargo near the main ramp. Her gray hair was cropped short and a prosthetic left arm of obviously custom design suggested a story I didn't know. When she turned and saw me, her weathered face registered shock, then cautious recognition. Rye, that you? She approached slowly, eyes narrowed. Hello, Maddox, I replied, offering a tired smile. I'm calling in that favor. Her gaze shifted to the sisters, then back to me. Must be some favor you need showing up with Zatarians in tow. You know there's chatter all over the communication channels about a human helping some high-value fugitives escape. Coroner, my stomach dropped. News traveled faster than I'd anticipated. Is that right? She studied us for a long moment, then sighed. Load bay 5 minutes. And for heaven's sake, cover their skin. Blue sticks out like a supernova in a dark nebula. She walked away, leaving us stunned by our good fortune. Can we trust her? Selene whispered. We don't have much choice, I replied honestly. But yes, I think so. I saved her ship once when raiders had disabled her engines. She's not one to forget a debt. 5 minutes later we slipped aboard the Second Chance through secondary cargo entrance. Maddox was waiting, arms crossed, expression unreadable. I'm not asking questions, she said as the hatch sealed behind us. Don't want to know, but I'm headed to the Caldera sector, and you can ride along if that works for you. You'll work for passage, all three of you. That's more than fair, I agreed quickly. The Caldera sector was far from Zatarian space, populated primarily by independent colonies with minimal central governance. We could disappear there, build new identities. Departure in 30 minutes. Engine room needs attention. Cooling system's been glitchy. Think you can handle that salvage, man? Maddox raised an eyebrow. I nodded, feeling truly useful for the first time in days. I'll have it running smooth before we hit the jump point. As Maddox showed us to our quarters, a small cargo conversion with basic amenities, I felt a weight lifting. We weren't safe yet, not by any measure, but we had a chance, a real one. That night, as the Second Chance broke orbit from the mining outpost, I stood in the observation blister watching the stars. Liara joined me, her presence quiet but comforting. What will happen to us now? She asked. After a while, we start over, I said. Simply find a place where you and Selene can build lives without looking over your shoulders, where I can maybe put down some roots for a chain. Together. There was hope in her question and something more, a tentative reaching toward possibility. I thought about the arena, about the impossible choice I'd refused to make. In doing so, I'd made a different choice entirely, to be responsible for something beyond myself, to connect rather than remain isolate. Together, I confirmed, if that's what you both want. She smiled then, the first genuine smile I'd seen since we met. I think it is, as the escape pod carried us through the void toward an uncertain future. I realized I'd changed in ways I couldn't yet fully understand. I'd gone from a solitary salvager to someone responsible for 2 lives. Besides my own, I'd chosen to stand against cruelty rather than participate in it, even at great personal risk. Whatever waited for us in the Caldera sector, safety or new dangers, I knew we would face it together. In refusing to choose which sister would live and which would die, I'd found something I hadn't realized I was missing: purpose, not just survival, but standing for something more. Outside the viewport, stars streaked by as our tiny vessel carried its fragile cargo of hope away from Karner. Behind us lay a world of brutal choices and blood sport. Ahead, uncertainty but also possibility. We had each other, our wits, and a determination that had already overcome impossible odds. I checked the navigation computer one more time, confirming our course, then settled for the journey. We were fugitives, hunted with few resources and fewer Allies, but we were alive and we were free. For now, that was enough. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but I felt ready to face them. No longer alone, no longer adrift. Lara placed her hand on my arm, her touch light but grounding. Selene joined us her earlier. Betrayal forgiven if not forgotten. The three of us brought together by cruelty, but bound now by something stronger. Refusal to let others define our worth. Our choices, our fate, we made it. Selene whispered, voicing what we all felt. Yes, I agreed, watching the stars blur as we accelerated toward our future. We made it.